Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Gen Politics. Today, the New York Times released an article titled, What the New Low Test Scores for 13-Year-Olds Says About U.S. Education Now. In the article was an explanation as to why there are low test scores and what the scores of these tests even are. The math and reading performance of 13-year-olds in the United States has hit the lowest level in decades. According to test scores released today from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the gold standard federal exam, the last time math performance was this low for 13-year-olds was in 1990. In reading, it was 2004. The 13-year-olds scored an average of 256 points out of 500 in reading, down from 263 years ago, and 271 points out of 500 in math, down from 283 years ago. A student survey given alongside the test showed that the percentage of 13-year-olds enrolled in algebra has declined to 24% from 34% in 2012, and the percentage of 13-year-olds who reported reading for fun has also declined. Last fall, 31% said they never or hardly ever read for fun, compared to 22% in 2012. So, these are not good numbers. And the article gives the explanation that COVID is the main aggravator for these negative test scores, which is probably true, but it doesn't explain the decades-long regression in test scores. There may have been a steeper drop-off because of COVID, students staying home, not being able to be in the classroom, the ability to be distracted easier, not having to participate as much because you have all the distractions of home, teachers having less tools to actually see what's going on with students. All sorts of those things, I'm sure, played a major role, which is another reason why the COVID lockdowns were such a disaster. But it doesn't explain this decades-long regression in test scores. And that was only the last time they were this low. And the article doesn't mention this, but I wouldn't be surprised if you went back even more decades that the test scores have regressed even more. So this is bad. 13-year-olds are struggling to read and they're struggling to do basic math, which is a huge problem, as those are two key components of being a functional member of society. They're two absolute necessities, and we're squandering away students' education. This is really bad. And this is another thing that may aggravate parents. We've seen already in recent years this huge pushback about what children are being taught in school or not being taught in school. And there's been a much more aggressive parent-involved movement that is pushing back against this educational system, which I think is great. The more checks you have in an institution, the more transparent you can make it, the better it typically becomes. And when parents get involved, hopefully they're educating their children alongside the institutional systems, as it's seen that the institutional systems themselves are not capable of raising and educating your children for you. But when they're there, they need to be taught these things. That's the requirement. But the US has lowered its requirements so much. We've kneecapped teachers in what they're able to teach. That's the most common complaint I hear from teachers is, I don't get to teach what I want. I get forced to teach to the tests, the national exams. I'm not allowed to go above and beyond or focus on things that I think are important. And in doing that, you are eliminating the teacher's ability to bring in any of their actual knowledge. You're giving them a baseline, and not as only just a baseline, they're forced to stay at that baseline. They teach to the test. And even teaching to the tests, these test scores have gone down, which is not a good prospect. That even while teaching directly to these tests, which is what most schools do now in order to get the most funding for higher test scores, you're seeing huge drops. And that's just the problem with the standardized tests. And then you're seeing another key indicator about problems is those involved in algebra. Down 10% in 10 years? That's not a good sign. That students are not getting to go above and beyond in education. They're not signing up for more challenging classes, if they're even offered. You look at states like California who are trying to equitize education, and they're not offering AP level classes. They're not offering fast track classes for students. You're handicapping the students that want to be successful. and you're trying to drag them down to the level of the unsuccessful students. And that's not fair to either of those types, because if you're teaching to a group of 30 students, there's probably about 3 that actually are right on the level where you're teaching. The other half are above, the other half are below. And the further you stretch that group inclusion, the more you include higher succeeding students and lower succeeding students, the less both those groups are getting taught where they should be. If you break those groups in half and have a higher succeeding math program and a lower succeeding math program, you can give more individual focus to a wider group of the students. But instead, they're trying to drag the successful students down to the lower succeeding students' levels. And they're trying to equitize it. They're saying that we need equal outcome for these students. It's embarrassing that these students are succeeding and some look at it and they feel like they're failures. Like, okay, well, that's a kind of a good incentive. You should feel a little pressure to get smarter. You should feel a little pressure to compete. When you take out all the competition, nobody wants to compete. No one's going to get better. What's the point? And then you look at the other half of that statistic that came out from the student survey, where children don't want to read. 9% more students say they never or hardly ever read for fun. So any sort of desire for education has been crushed out of students. They don't want to learn on their own time. They don't want to read. They don't find it enjoyable. There's a problem there. Children are born with this natural curiosity, and through the educational system, we crush that curiosity, mold children and equitize them, eliminate competition, and make it a miserable experience. And so students don't see a benefit in reading. When people don't seek to educate themselves for their own benefit, only to the level that it's forced, we have a problem. Because people should be educating themselves from the day they're born to the day they die. You shouldn't give up on learning. It's one of the most valuable parts of the human experience. But these children are, and there's a reason for it. And that is the core of the problem, is why are children not incentivized to learn? And I'm sure you've heard speakers say, educators, professors, you walk in a group of children, a kindergarten, ask them if they have any questions about anything, science, math, history, millions of questions. You walk into a high school, no questions, they're not interested. And so for those who are not interested in education, why would they try to educate themselves? It's not surprising these test scores have gone down because people have only been disincentivized more and more to compete, more and more to try, more and more to learn. And that's the biggest problem with our educational system. So hopefully we'll see a bigger pushback on this, a bigger drive to fix this system, to say these numbers are not good enough. We're falling on the world stage, and we need parents to step up and force the educational system to do its intended purpose and to keep a closer eye on it. And hopefully we'll eliminate one more problem that our young teens are facing. Now that you've heard what I think, please let me know what you think down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.